So, Joe Burrow came out today, I guess, or whatever. Bengals, here's the headline from NFL.com. Bengals, Joe Burrow. The Eagles are paying everybody. That seems like the way. Well, Joe Burrow, that's a great statement. That's a great, headline that you can give the NFL.com and media outlets and Cincinnati media to make you look like a great guy. But you're making $55 million a year, and the reality is you can't pay everybody. That's just the reality of it. I wish that the Steelers could have kept Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger, Javon Hargrave, Bud Dupree, all these great players, but at the end of the day, it's a business. So really, at the end of the day, all you're doing is adding to the circus show that already is the Cincinnati Bengals. Um, you are coming out here a Super Bowl. You have never won a Super Bowl. You've only been to one. You've had one playoff berth your entire career, maybe two. Yeah, you put up some big numbers in the league, but you have all that talent around you, and now you're begging the front office to bring all that talent back around you. And basically, I was going to rip him and say, well, why don't you give money back? But I looked more into it, and you could convert some of the money into a signing bonus, which will lower the cap hit. Burrow said you can push some of the money to the back end of the contract that lowers the cap hit, and then you get to the back end of the contract, you can restructure it and convert it to a signing bonus. Who says they want to keep you longer than after this contract? I mean, you're talking years and years down the line. You're trying to dictate the entire future of the franchise right now, and you're trying to use your influence to dictate and basically act as if you're the general manager. What's next? Are you going to act as if you're the head coach too? You're the general manager, you're the head coach. What? What's going on here, Joe Burrow? The reality is you got Jamar Chase coming out here saying he's not going to accept any contract any less. He needs a penny more than Justin Jefferson. You got Trey Hendrickson threatening to hold out. You got T. Higgins threatening to hold out. T. Higgins is going to make $30 million. What is T. Higgins going to get? He's already making like 24. So what? You're going to shell him out another $25 million. You got you making $55 million. That makes $80 million in cap space. Then what? Then you got to pay Jamar Chase $35 million. So let's add there's $110 million, and then Trey Hendrickson's probably going to get 27, $28 million a year. So that's $128 million in cap space between five players on your roster. And the reality is your roster's not that good. The reality is you never had a chance to make the playoffs. The reality is you started off as one of the worst teams in the NFL. Yeah, you had a good late season run, but that late season run wasn't enough, and it was never going to be enough, especially how slow they got off. You had one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So why is the franchise is going to mortgage their entire future on a few players that were only able to produce a 9-8 record last year and miss the playoffs? I could see if you made the playoffs or something and made a deep run, but you didn't. And then the year before that, you missed the playoffs. Cincinnati's going to take a major step back. Cincinnati is pretty much a laughingstock of the NFL and the AFC North. You have an overrated head coach who had a 1-15 season and then an 0-16 season, to where you was able to draft Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, to where you've had the success you've had these past few years. But now the time has come to where you have to pay these people, and they're not getting these cheap rookie contracts anymore, and it's a business, and these players want to get paid. And Joe, you're going to have to give a lot back for the Cincinnati Bengals to have to, give you and get all these players around you. If you were such a great quarterback, you wouldn't really need a T. Higgins. You could live with a Jamar Chase and then draft a guy, and you can make unknown receivers great, because that's what great quarterbacks do. They make unknown receivers great. Everybody said the Steelers were crazy for letting Mike Wallace go. And then guess what? They found a Martavius Bryant. They found an Antonio Brown. They found Deontay Johnson, who had some good years. They found a George Pickens. That's what football's all about. You got to make good business decisions, and you can't sign everybody. As much as, fans want to bring all their favorite players back, You just can't do it. And all this does is just add to the circus show that already is the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, you have distractions everywhere in Cincinnati. You got nobody playing for nobody. You got everybody playing for the money. And now I guess this is a lame duck attempt for Joe Burrow to act like he's Mr. Goody Two Shoes and let's just open up the purse and hand out everybody. Let's mortgage the entire future on this thing that when we was only able to go 9-8. If I'm the front office, I'd be like, hey, I'd be listening for trade offers for you right now because I'd say, hey, you know what? We're nowhere near competing, and we're not going to be able to compete with you at quarterback anyway. You might as well just scrap it down and rebuild. Because if you literally go out there and you pay T. Higgins and you go out there and you pay Jamar Chase, your defense is going to suck. And the AFC North is a defensive conference. You can sit there and say offenses win championships all you want, but where's Cincinnati been? How many division crowns does Cincinnati have in the AFC North? They made a Super Bowl. Whoop-de-doo. The Ravens and the Steelers own the division. And the Steelers whooped Cincinnati the first game. Cincy whooped them the second game. But that game was pretty much meaningless in the grand scheme of things for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That last game of the season. It was a bad loss, but at the end of the day, it was a meaningless game. The Steelers already had a playoff spot locked up, and Cincinnati basically had to win that game to get help from like 20 other teams. So this big narrative that, just having a franchise quarterback is going to, somehow create a Super Bowl roster. This is the problem when you have franchise quarterbacks. You have to pay them all this money, and your roster is going to lack depth and it's going to lack talent. After the Steelers paid Ben Roethlisberger all that money, the defense took a major step back. And a lot of people want to put that blame on coaching and this and that. It's just the reality of the business, man. When you go out there and you shell out all this money on offense or to a few players, you're going to start losing talent, man, elsewhere. And you have too much talent on this roster to really go 9-8. So the Zach Taylor's overrated. Your defense is terrible. And the offense just ain't enough to get it done. The reality is you're not going to be able to score 40 points in every single game. That's just not the reality. And that's what Cincinnati has to do to win games. They literally have to go out there and put up 30, 40 points a game to win ball games. And I don't care what anybody says. In the playoffs, when it's cold, when it's wet, when it's nasty, that's when you need to have to be able to play defense. That's when you have to need to be able to keep players out of the end zone. That's when you need to have to be able to run the ball and actually play defense when it counts the most in January. So the Cincinnati Bengals are a circus show. They're going to fall off. The AFC North runs through Pittsburgh and Baltimore, and that's exactly what's going to happen. In 2026, the AFC North is still going to continue to run through Baltimore and Pittsburgh because right now the Pittsburgh Steelers are the most flush that they have ever been in salary cap since they have for years since the post Ben era. This is the most salary cap the Steelers had in an offseason in the longest time that I can remember because the Steelers went with that philosophy. You're trying to rip off the Steelers' philosophy and Kevin Colbert's philosophy with this kicking the cap down the road method. And what happens is the Steelers had some very mediocre last few years trying to hang on to Ben Roethlisberger and trying to win Ben Roethlisberger a championship to where they was not able to make any real splash moves in the offseason, bring in any real talent, and they just had to rely on Ben Roethlisberger. And that's what Cincinnati's going to have to do for the next 5 to 10 years is rely on Joe Burrow putting up 30 to 35 points a game to win games because their defense is light years behind the Pittsburgh Steelers in the defense. And the Steelers offense, is it light years behind Cincinnati? I can't really say it's light years behind Cincinnati because honestly, we got a lot of young talent on the come up. The only thing they're really missing is a quarterback. And the Steelers offense has been steadily progressing slowly year after year. A lot of people were saying the Arthur Smith offense is the same as Matt Canada's. There was a lot of similarities, but the reality is it was a hell of a lot better than the Matt Canada offense. And the last 3 or 4 games of the season was bad offensively for the Steelers. But for the most part, they had a top 10, top 15 offense last year. And then they had some big injuries, and they fell off late in the season. And I just don't see it happening with all this salary cap that the Steelers have. I really think they're basically bringing all their players back to all their main names. They're bringing back to this team next year, and they're going to add about $55 million to $70 million in talent to a roster that went 10-7 last year. And not only that, they're going to add draft capital to a roster that almost won the division last year that they were predicted to go dead last in. So my prediction is another third place finish for the Cincinnati Bengals. Probably go 7-10, and then you really got to start to question. Zach Taylor will probably end up getting fired, and Cincy will remain Cincy. That's what they do. They'll have a few bad years, get some good draft picks, and then they'll have one or two, half decent years, and then they fall off again for another 5 to 10 years. And this is where we're at with Cincinnati. Cincinnati is about to fall off and collapse, and Joe Burrow is just adding to the circus show and the collapsal of the Cincinnati Bengals organization, which is pretty much a dumpster fire. So this is your daily Cincinnati update from your friendly Pittsburgh Steelers fan, Cincinnati.